Hey everybody, it's Andy Kushner, host of The Wedding Biz. Welcome back to yet another episode, and today's is an amazing one. Let me first mention that if you missed last week's episode, you've got to check it out. It was a re-release of an interview I did about a year ago with Brian Raffanelli, had a new introduction, also recorded the Next Level episode in which we take out some big highlights of the interview and translate them into specific tactics for you to use to take your business to the next level. Melissa was on vacation, so my guest host was Sean Lowe, who many of you know, founder of the Business of Being Creative. We had an incredible conversation about the interview with Brian. So again, be sure to check out last week's episode with Brian Raffanelli and also the follow-on episode of The Next Level. So before I announce today's guest, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you. I am so grateful and appreciative for you tuning in, listening to the show. And really one of the purposes of this for me was to create this like-minded community, that supports each other. And through these interviews, we are educating and inspiring people, listening to these icons of the business tell their stories. And so much appreciation goes to you tuning in. And I want to say that as rewarding as having a career in this wedding and event industry is, we all know it is an extremely challenging one. And so again, I want to say we all need to support each other. And so I want to ask that each of you help us spread the word and help others by listening to this show, to be inspired, to get educated, all of that. So if each of you could share either this episode that we're about to release or a previous one that was meaningful to you, if you could share one episode with just even one single friend in the industry, we can help spread the word, further create this community. And again, that would mean a lot to us as well. So today's guest is Abbey and Tait Larson of Style Me Pretty. That's right. Abbey Larson is the founder of the wildly popular online wedding resource, Style Me Pretty. Abbey and her husband, Tait Larson, bootstrapped Style Me Pretty and grew it to one of the largest reaches in the industry. And then the big news in 2012, they sold it to AOL. Abbey stayed on for 4 more years and then left, taking a year off to spend with her children and take a break. Tait mentored startups. He worked as an entrepreneur in residence at, I hope I say this correctly, the Barbassi Lab at Northeastern University. And when AOL announced the closing of this, there was an incredible outcry from the industry. People were so blown away by this. And Abbey and Tait eventually took Style Me Pretty back. It's a very big story, and I was so excited to be able to go visit them at their home in Boston and dig so deep into the whole story behind, not just the AOL portion of it. And believe me, we got into that. I got the scoop. You're about to hear it. But also, I wanted to go deep into who are each of them? How did they each grow up? How did their personal stories inform who they are today, which obviously has a huge impact on this business. And so you're going to hear the details about that, as well as how they built such a wonderful and successful business. And then again, I wanted to know, how did they feel when they first heard the news? Because, well, I'm not going to give away how they found out. You will find that out in the story. It's pretty surprising how they found out, and you'll hear what they thought and all of that. So you're also going to be able to hear what they're thinking about as they rebuild this business that will now exist in a vastly different world than what it was, even as far back as 2011, before they sold to AOL. It's a fascinating story. I also want to urge you not to forget to listen to our follow-on segment that we have with each interview, The Next Level, in which my co-host, and yes, Melissa is back from her vacation, the two of us are going to tease out some of the highlights and discuss the main points of the interview to break them down and deliver specific tactics to raise your business to the next level. So be sure to listen to that as well. Enjoy my conversation with Abbey and Tait of Style Me Pretty. So Abbey and Tait, thank you very much for inviting me into your home here outside of Boston to get the story about the two of you and how you first came up with the idea of Style Me Pretty. And Do you all realize that this is like one of the hottest topics in the industry? I mean, the paparazzi I had to break through.
Yeah.
The helicopter. Drones are crashing into each other trying to get it all.
As we work from our sofa in our pajamas.
No, we're going to pretend like it's really big time.
Don't all bloggers work in their basements? Isn't that like
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
God knows what people are working in,
Right.
But you know what I would like to do to start with is get some of each of yours early story,
Sure.
Up until the time that you meet. So Abby, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
So I understood I just met your mother, very sweet, and being from Houston, and that's where you grew up was Houston, Texas.
Yep, I did.
Did you have any kind of passion related to anything about what you're doing now when you're like a little girl? Anything about
boys?
Boys.
Yeah. I can't remember any of my teachers' names, but I remember every boyfriend I ever had.
Oh, you did?
So maybe love is a common theme in my life. I don't know. No, I never ever envisioned a path like this. My dad was a serial entrepreneur though, so there were never really any boundaries for what I had to do or what I could or couldn't do. So
what did he do? It was just several different things? Well,
he owned a frozen yogurt wholesale company. He owned an ear laser company. He owned a costume jewelry company. He would drag us around from hotel to hotel and help him sell his wholesale jewelry line.
He would take you with him? How old were you? When do you remember doing
we were
this?
Like 10, maybe 9, 10. My sister was in her teens. Yeah. There wasn't a box that we had to fit in growing up. And my mom was incredibly creative. She came from a family of artists. So I think that perhaps I didn't outright think that I would be doing something like this, something creative and so public, but the bricks were sort of being laid very early on.
Well, I'm also thinking that you might not have understood every element of it, but you're experiencing, again, your mother is very artistic, creative, right? So that kind of opens up the world to anything. And then your father is this, like you said, serial entrepreneur, and you're experiencing that in various ways. I mean, I believe that just gets in your system.
It does. It really does. And Tait, we can bounce over to Tait in a minute, but Tait comes from a similar family. Our parents built their own businesses from scratch. And so that's sort of all we knew. So I definitely dabbled in a lot of other random jobs myself. But when it came time to kind of dig in and create a career for myself, there weren't any rules. And I think that led me ultimately to where we are right now.
What about like high school and college? I mean, were you doing anything kind of different at that time?
I was a cheerleader. And that's all I did and thought about and loved. I was a cheerleader and boys. Yes. Like your stereotypical Friday Night Lights was the town that I grew up in.
Yeah.
And, Friday night, everything closed down and we went to the football field and I cheered in my little skirt and then hugged my quarterback boyfriend.
Oh, come on. The cheerleader and the quarterback. This is so cliche. You realize that?
It's so cliche. It's scary. I know. So then I went to Vanderbilt and I majored in communications. So I guess that all roads sort of led here, but I didn't ever have any idea that this was the path that it was going to take. I even had to take a remedial writing class when I first got to Vanderbilt.
Oh, come on, really? That's funny.
Because I wasn't writing properly, which actually did me a favor. And I'm kind of glad that I stuck to that because I write much like I speak now. And I think that's ultimately why readers connect with our brand. So,
well, just so I get some context, how many years after college did you meet Tait?
So we actually both went to Vanderbilt.
Oh, that's where you met?
No. So he was 2 years older than me and he moved out to San Francisco. When it was time for me to graduate, I moved out to San Francisco also. I followed my then boyfriend.
Oh, no, all of these, this is also cliche. All of this is totally there.
Yeah.
That's better.
So then my boyfriend moved in to an apartment and his roommate was Tait.
Oh, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is, okay.
Yep,
do we have a soap opera going on here?
We definitely had a soap opera. He moved in with Tait and then he dumped me right when I got out to San Francisco.
On.
Yeah. A couple weeks after I got there, he dumped me. And so, I don't know, 5 or 6 months later, I started dating Tait, his roommate, in secret. For the first 3 months, we had to go on secret dates and...
Wow, it was just too complicated, even though he
don't even know. I mean, back then, everything is so
at that age,
important and dramatic. And
San Francisco was this place where you'd have these groups of friends, and I felt like there were these like really tight knit circles, right? And so you had this boyfriend and we hung out with all these people. A lot of them were from Vanderbilt. And like, we didn't think that the circle could really handle it. So we dated in sync and it didn't work. It didn't work so well.
But we started dating when I was 22.
Yeah. So 2001 was really when we started dating. Yeah.
Really?
I guess it would have been 01 because you would have just graduated.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to start and come back now with you, Tait. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in this town. So we're in Wayland, Massachusetts right now.
How come you don't have the accent?
Well, people outside of Boston don't pick it up as much. It's really people in the city, which is kind of different from Texas. People in Texas, the people from the cities don't have the accents.
Okay, because I stopped at this diner. Well, okay, there we have it, right? A diner in like Waltham or something like that. And
they're going to have the accents out there.
Oh yeah, and like I was telling you, I remember it from when I was here in college, hearing it a lot. So what were you like as a kid? Like what were your passions?
I think Wayland is a little bit of a bubble. So, I was a pretty typical high school kid who enjoyed playing sports. I think really enjoyed like basketball and, was not much of a student until I got into like my junior, senior year. And at that point, I sort of learned this lesson that, hey, if you put in the effort, you can really make some strides. So at that point, the switch flipped for me a little bit and I became a good student.
Well, what did your parents do?
So my parents, a lot like Abby's parents were entrepreneurs. A little differently, they ran the same company for like 40 years.
40 years?
40 years.
Wow.
So they ran a fire protection for nuclear power plant services company.
Okay, that's pretty critical.
Yeah, pretty niche, right?
Yeah.
So, I sort of grew up watching these entrepreneurs and I had a tremendous respect for people that ran their own businesses. And also, my parents were I was good at math. So they were always kind of pushing me into the engineering side of things.
Yeah.
Which really, I think, kind of fit with my personality. Like I over-focus on things a little too much, but I can get into a really hard problem and I really like to dissect it and take an analytical mind to it.
Well, then what did you major in at Vanderbilt?
Computer science and math.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, very typical engineering track. And I remember going to all these schools and, again, when you're younger, you sort of don't seek out challenges maybe as much. And for me, I was like, oh, there's no language requirement at Vanderbilt. I can just go in and be an engineer. That's great. Like that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. I find that my engineer friends, so laser focused like that. Like when I was at BU, I had a friend over at MIT and one of the frats and they were all engineering. And I remember walking in one day, they were all like 30 of them huddled around this TV watching Star Trek, so
innately nerdy.
It was really funny. So I guess Tait, when you were graduating from college, you moved to San Francisco, right?
So,
why?
Right when I got into Vanderbilt, like Mozilla, the web browser was coming out, right? And I remember just sitting at one of these computers. This was like 96, right? And just playing with this thing and going, this is really amazing, right? This opportunity for all these people all over the world to communicate and talk to each other in this way that you could just kind of see was going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's really all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to work on the internet and kind of like be a part of its growth.
So what was your vision as far as a career at that moment?
Well, it's so funny. Like, back then, especially in the late 90s, there was a lot of like, even then we were starting to really glorify the startup in Silicon Valley and a lot of this stuff.
That's right. Yeah.
So I'd read these magazines like Red Herring and these old magazines that maybe don't exist anymore. Wired is still around, but a lot of them have kind of gone away.
My brother wrote tons of articles
Did
for
he
Wired.
Really?
Yeah. I know all about it.
And, there was this Silicon Valley culture and this startup culture where it was a complete meritocracy. You could come in and work hard. And if you had like a creative idea or if you were really good at something, you could suddenly sort of skyrocket to success really fast. And I think I fell in love with that. It's a little bit of, it's not completely true, right? It's a lot harder. It takes a lot more hard work and a lot of luck. But that was sort of something that I wanted to be a part of really since I was a computer science major at Vanderbilt almost 20 years ago.
Wow. And Abby, what about you? So in terms of, you moved to San Francisco, what kind of a job did you get? What were you thinking for your future? Or were you not still thinking about boys and cheerleading?
Yeah, no, I wasn't thinking. I even now, I'm not really thinking about my future. I run my life largely by emotion. And at the time, I just wanted to be able to afford my apartment and do something creative. I've always, I get very bored very easily. So I took a job in public relations representing restaurants in the Bay Area. It was an internship and I was paid $7 an hour.
Yeah.
And I think my bus ticket ended up more for that month than I was actually earning.
Oh, geez.
But I got free food out of it. And so that was a big deal. So I took a job at a little stationery company over on Union Street just to supplement my income. And I fell in love with paper. and just the art of invitations and paper goods. And that sort of kind of sat in the back of my head for a little while. And then I realized pretty quickly that I couldn't pay my rent even with both of these jobs, San Francisco, obviously.
Sure.
Yeah. So I took a secretarial job, which I'm sure my dad loved after that expensive education. Took a secretarial job at a hedge fund. And I was answering phones at market hours at like 5 a.m. But it was paying the bills. But I kept my job at the stationery store because I thought it was fun. Mm-hmm. So I kind of moved up the ranks a little bit at the hedge fund, but I hated every moment of it. And I would cry going into work. You know, I wouldn't sleep the night before on a Sunday, just dreading it. So I just quit one day.
Had you saved any money?
No. So I actually had to move back to Texas and move back in with my mom and dad.
Wow.
And that was okay with me. It felt like I needed to reset and kind of take stock of where things were going. I was in my 20s, you know, I was a baby. The real world was quite a shock to me, having been in this great little Vanderbilt bubble. But so I had been dating Tait for a while, so he actually moved with me back to Texas.
Whoa, Tait, all right.
Yeah.
Good job, man.
And he got an apartment down the street, and it was okay, right? We survived.
We had a great 9 months, 12 months, something like that. Yeah.
And in that 9 months, I was the only one of my friends without a job. So I decided to help my girlfriend, the first of our friends who was getting married. I decided to help her plan her bachelorette party. So I made these invitations, kind of tapping into that paper store background.
Right.
And they were cute. I sewed these little bags and put flip-flops in them and attached an invitation. Anyway, I sent them out, and she had them in her hand when she was meeting with her wedding planner, her name is Debbie Lilly. She's with the Perfect Event out of Chicago. And Debbie said, "Who did those invitations?" And Jill said, "Oh, my friend Abby did." So Debbie started ordering little one-off invitations from me.
Wow, okay.
Debbie also planned all the events for Harpo Studios, Oprah's production company.
Sure.
So I got an order for Oprah.
Oh my God, Abby, the serendipity.
I know. And it wasn't a big order. It was a personal stationery order. And I got a check signed from Oprah.
Yeah.
And I never cashed the check. I put it in a frame because I was so excited. But that ultimately launched my stationery business. So while I was interviewing for jobs at marketing firms and things like that, PR firms, I was sort of on the side doing these invitations. And I decided to stop looking for a job and to take out a small business loan. My dad co-signed it, $60,000, and I launched a stationery company. So I designed a line of wedding invitations, and we debuted at the me and my dad, debuted at the National Stationery Show in New York that year.
Wow, and how did you do overall?
Oh my God, that was the hardest job I've ever had in my life. I still think of it as like my hard knock school of business school. You know, I learned everything not to do in a business. I worked my tail off. I learned really ultimately how to run or not run a business from the ground up. And we can go back a little bit, but I eventually sold that business.
What were some of the biggest things that you learned not to do?
I think that's when I started learning that the rules to which we are accustomed, you know, putting ads in magazines and marketing in certain ways and stocking up on product and wholesaling and things like that, they aren't always correct. And, you know, what we see our peers doing, it's not something that you always need to mimic because the world is changing very fast. And there are different avenues that you might not have explored yet. So, I mean, I still remember putting a big ad in a magazine. It cost me like $30,000 or something ridiculous like that. I think they discounted it for me at the time because I was small. But it did nothing. It did absolutely nothing for my business. It didn't bring in one single order. And then I got a feature on Daily Candy, which was a e-newsletter from a million years ago. And I got like 5 orders. I
remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it started from the very beginning. I was learning that these traditional paths were changing and that we had to kind of redefine what it meant to run a successful small business.
Well, and I'm also thinking that it taught you not, like you said, not necessarily to see what the others do or anything. And, okay, that's the way to do it, but to always question, right? Which kind of opens you up to innovation and...
Oh, totally. It totally paved the way for Style Me Pretty specifically because we really bucked tradition when this blog was launched. But, you know, from the very basics, from, pinching your pennies and knowing where every dollar is spent and not trusting with abandon your manufacturers and your suppliers and things like that. Really, really getting in there and being a personal, making everything personal, making you a part of every decision that's made was probably some of the biggest lessons that I took to Style Me Pretty.
But can't that you as an entrepreneur really overwhelm you and getting too involved in the small details? Isn't there a risk of that?
I'm sure. I mean, there's always risks. I think that when you're 25, 26 years old and $60,000 at the time was so much money, to me, being a part of every detail meant that I was learning ultimately
That's
how
right.
to run
You're learning
a business.
every piece of it.
I was learning every part of it. So I knew how every wheel was turning, and that meant that I could kind of make changes and I could push things a little bit differently. And I could really, I was just taking so much. I was soaking so much up. And I don't look back at that time as necessarily a successful business. I was really lucky to sell it to a wonderful person who took care of the business, but I got lucky with that. Shortly after that, I launched Style Me Pretty, and I knew without a doubt that I was going to do things differently with Style Me Pretty. So, it gave me an incredible foundation.
How did you get the idea to launch Style Me Pretty, and what did that look like?
So that's kind of a long and winding road. Tait was getting his master's at Stanford at the time. So backing up, we lived in Houston. Tait was applying to graduate school to get his computer science master's, and he got into Stanford. And when Stanford says yes,
school. No, that's like,
you go.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah. So we packed up and moved back out to California.
To Palo Alto.
Yeah. And while Tait was in school, I took a continuing education class on blogging. And there was maybe 30 people in the class. Blogging was very, very new. There were, especially blogging was fairly steady in the kind of news and technical world, but in the creative, interior design, weddings, it was very new. There were very few blogs out there that were really, making a name for themselves. But so I sat down in the class, and the professor, he opened the class by saying that none of us would make a single dollar writing a blog.
Wow.
Yeah, that we had to have it rooted in passion. It's more of a journaling experience, and that this is not a sustainable business. So
that's an attention grabber.
That confused me.
Yeah, I'll bet.
It confused me because I was so much a part of the technical world via Tait that wasn't making sense. Things were changing so quickly.
Well, and again, I'm thinking back to your story that you don't take anything at face value for granted, right? Yeah. That's another aspect, is the way your perspective in general is.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so I took that kind of statement home to Tait, and he said, "Oh, that's garbage."
Oh, I love
we
that.
unpacked that a little bit, because at the time I was working for a company that did online classified ads. So a lot of ads were coming out in the consumer space for us. And I was like, there's really no reason you can't go out and sell ads around this in a very targeted and interesting way for people. So
we lived in a little apartment complex where everybody was working at a startup, basically. And I remember our neighbor was working for Ning, right? And we were sitting in the car, and this idea that the world wasn't headed towards a more intimate kind of blogging vibe was just ridiculous to them. So I started writing Style Me Pretty. And if you look back at the very early days, it was on a Typepad account. I did my own logo. I scrapped, piecemealed it, just smushed it together. And I didn't have any relationships really with vendors. So I was really just writing about pretty things and weddings. I created inspiration boards for friends, and, I did Q&As and things like that based on invitation etiquette and the things that I knew, but it wasn't at all what it is today. I started writing, and I think that, the first month I had 3 readers, my mom, my dad, and Tait.
Yeah, right.
And then month 2, it was maybe 20. And then, by 3 or 4 months in, people were reading it. And I started to see that there was this enormous gap between what was happening offline and what was happening online.
Oh, interesting.
And the only real wedding content that was out there, and of course there were a couple of wedding blogs. They were mostly like business-minded blogs to support their own businesses. But the only real content and inspiration that brides had were in magazines. And magazines were seeing such a huge shift at that point. This was 2007, 2000. Yeah, they were seeing an enormous shift. There was In Style Weddings. I think that was the first one that maybe closed. Don't quote me on that. I'm not sure. But magazines were really seeing some changes. And I kind of felt like what was happening offline was that brides had to go into a drugstore, buy a magazine. They'd go home, read it really quickly, probably earmark the pages, and then wait 3 or 4 months for the next issue to come out. So for their entire wedding planning journey, they were maybe getting 2 to 3 magazines in. And I knew that the weddings that were inside these magazines were beautiful, but once you started dissecting how they were selected from the editors at the magazines, you realized that there were hundreds of weddings that were sitting on the cutting room floor that were probably in limbo. You know, the vendors weren't sure if they were going to get published or not. They needed them to get published because they wanted that marketing, that innate, organic, really authentic marketing.
Yes.
But only, 5 or 6 were going to ultimately get chosen.
God, Abby, what a realization.
So then I just started reaching out, and I actually think that the group of vendors that I reached out to initially are ultimately why Style Me Pretty is successful, because I chose, and I don't know, I honestly don't know if this was intentional or unintentional, but I chose a group of vendors that cared about the way that they put themselves out there, that they were luxury vendors, but their work didn't feel intimidating or scary or unapproachable. So it was Lisa Vorse of Oh How Charming and Jose Villa, Mindy Rice, Mar Romero, Joel Serrato. It was this group of Southern California vendors that were excited about something new. Lisa Lefkowitz, some San Francisco vendors, Nancy Lushensky. There was just all these like really cool vendors that were doing creative things that had been featured in magazines a million times, but that needed something more. They needed something more immediate and more tangible so that when their work was up, someone didn't have to dog-ear the page. They could click a link.
But I also want to add, like, I've had a lot of them on the show, like Mindy Rice and Jose Villa, and there's also heart. Not that others don't have heart, but I mean, there's there's people who really lead with the heart.
Yeah.
And then there's other more business-minded. Then there's, of course, the combination.
There's so many wonderful vendors, but that group of vendors, they're not fakes. They are really good at what they do.
Just pure creative, and then they figure out the business side.
And they're educated in their craft. They know it. They live it. They try to learn new things every day. And they're interested in how the world is changing. And they get on board with that. And they try new things, and they're willing to play and experiment.
Were you selective when you were choosing these people? Is that how you looked at it too? That you kind of had that in your mind, or the criteria created on its own?
I think one thing that was very important in the early days of Style Me Pretty was that I led with my gut. And we can talk about that now because we approach things differently now. But I was not afraid to reach out to people despite their, fame or notoriety in this business. I was really honest. I had a very clear vision of what I liked and what I didn't like. I wrote just like I'm talking to you. I had flaws.
Well, you're known for that. I mean, being very personable, and this big word, authentic. I mean, I believe that is the heart of Style Me Pretty. And I think we'll get to it. But in terms of the whole AOL thing, announcing the closing, I think because it started to lose the heart. But let's stick with your story here.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I just naturally gravitated towards vendors that I felt had that shared approach.
So you really connected with people.
I did. I mean, one of the first weddings we put up was an Aaron DeLacy, Lisa Vorse wedding. And I would break a wedding down into 10 parts. I mean, I was definitely trying to game the system even back then. I broke a wedding into 10 parts where, a magazine, you see a limited amount of photos that are very edited and curated down. I put more photos, but I made people come back 10 times throughout the day to check. So part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5. And each part led to a very small snippet of the next part of the wedding. And so these readers were coming back over and over and over and over and over again. And so I was kind of unintentionally creating this like behavioral shift in their day-to-day routine.
And a sense of community.
And loyalty, and brand loyalty. Yeah. So they were engaging in the comments. I was talking right back to them. We were blurring the lines between what an editor does and what a reader does.
Interesting, yeah.
So it created this very, very loyal following who told their friends, who told their friends, who told their friends. And so it started to kind of skyrocket from there. And once I started down the path of the real wedding, that's ultimately when Style Me Pretty as a brand sort of began to take shape. And we took that concept and really ran with it.
And Tait, you were about to say something?
Yeah, I'm glad she's diving into the real wedding part as well, because I think that's so key to sort of the journey of Style Me Pretty, right? Yeah. there's this opportunity to pull all of this great information, planning or otherwise, out of these real weddings, and no one was really doing it back then. And Style Me Pretty, I feel like, was this, just this realization that, wow, there's all this tremendous content, right? Let's get it up. It doesn't have to be, we set up a photo shoot and, we do a fake wedding. Like, the fact that we are actually saying the words real wedding is kind of like,
as opposed to
it
fake
tells
wedding.
you something a little bit about where the industry was, right? When I say the words real wedding right now to brides or people that are relatively new to the industry, they're like, well, isn't a wedding just a wedding? Like, what's a real wedding? Yeah. But we had to distinguish between a real wedding and a photo shoot or a styled wedding or, those types of things when you were first starting out.
And what was your role in the beginning? I mean, obviously you're supporting the dream, the idea.
What was my role? Yeah. So in the beginning, I was still working a day job for, I would say, the first year and a half of Style Me Pretty. So I was able to give Abby a few little tips here and there, like lots of blogs back then were, so-and-so.typepad.com. And really quickly we were like, no, this needs to live on its own domain. Right? There are all these benefits to SEO and just marketing.
It was definitely
brand.
Simpler back then. The needs and wants and the requirements were much simpler back then.
There was no mobile. I mean, we can dive into the whole mobile shift at some point as well if you guys are interested. But obviously the world has changed a lot. But, helping her with some of the HTML. And then a lot of it was really her kind of finding the footing there and really getting things going. And, I came in, we can sort of do this chronologically or we can talk about it now. But, essentially when Abby was having her first child, it was kind
literally
of a
on the
sink or
delivery
swim
room table
moment.
You mean our first child, you're saying, not her.
Mine. No, she's mine.
Oh, okay.
No. She belongs to both of us. It's our child. But I did all the work. So.
Abby always says my
wedding, my children.
I think it's probably her child. I think it's my dog, perhaps.
I don't know. I caught that. I had to run with it.
No. It's totally fine. So when we were having our first child, obviously you did all the work, honey.
Yes. I recall you snoring on the floor beside me.
There was an offer for acquisition for Style Me Pretty, and it was, okay, are we going to dive in and really do this, or are we going to sell this brand?
How many years into this?
Oh, this was 2008.
This is a year.
But 1 year there was an acquisition offer?
Yes, there was.
Interesting. Now, without saying numbers, was it a lucrative kind of an offer?
It was for us.
It was more money than I'd ever heard of in my life. I mean, I thought, what? And it kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And we weren't working with a broker or an investment firm or anything like that. It just kind of came out of nowhere. And we ran the number past Tait's parents and their accountant, and they thought we were insane to even consider turning it down.
Yeah.
So one of the differences between Abby's parents and my parents, on the surface, two sets of entrepreneurial parents. I think my parents are much more conservative, right? So interestingly, they had their accountant call me up 3 weeks after the offer and was like, you got to take this offer. I've seen so many businesses pass on these offers and you're not going to get another one.
We were still in the very early days of blogging too. Yeah. So blogging to our parents was a little foreign.
Absolutely. My mom was like, how did you conjure this thing out of nothing? And how could you possibly not sell it?
But still, did you even for a moment consider it?
Oh, sure.
Yes.
We negotiated for a few weeks. And the day that I gave birth to my daughter, Audrey, we turn them down.
Come on, that day.
The day. And Tait quit his job.
Why? How did you decide that?
Because it was the first time that somebody else saw value in what we were doing.
So it was like confirmation in a way.
It was confirmation. They basically just gave us a permission slip to go for it.
Serious now.
So Abby was running this. I think, did you have a salesperson at that time?
Yes.
You had one. So it was a team of two. And the market was just about to crash. We're talking end of 2008. Right. So we're right before that major financial crisis. Right. And for us, I think we were like, what if we actually tried? What if I sort of brought some of my skill set to it and we could start to hire more people and actually give this thing some legs. At that point, it had real revenue. So we were able to self-fund a little bit. And we were actually, I think, really, really lucky that the market crashed when it did, because for a lot of other people, that funding really dried up. And it actually played into our hands.
Two questions. First of all, was there any sense of fear? I mean, I understand the entrepreneurial spirit that you both have and you really believe in what you have. You've got a confirmation, serious that this is worth something. Was there any kind of fear oh my God, this is scary? Or did you feel so confident we're diving in?
I didn't feel fear. I have a brain. Tait has a brain. We've had jobs before. We knew that if worse came to worse, we'd go get a job. You know, it wasn't a sink or swim kind of situation. It was, wow, you're in this really cool position. You just validated the fact that you're headed in the right direction through this acquisition offer. Let's give it a shot. And that it was just me at that point, you know, me and Michelle. And so Tait then quit his job. He was working remotely. We were living in Boston, but he was working for a company in the Valley. And he quit and he started working full time for Style Me Pretty.
And Tait, why did you say the timing was so good that the market then crashed?
Well, you know, it's really funny operating today. There's obviously a lot of challenges between today and 2008, but one of the big challenges is that if you want to go raise money for your seed round for your business, that money is pretty easy to come by, right? Back then, I think, you know, it was like The Knot, it was Martha Stewart Weddings, it was Brides, and we could be this up and coming brand, right? And we could self-fund and, you know,
there was no money to be had. The even option, the idea that we would raise money was out of the question.
We're such bootstrappers. You know, when you ask questions like, was it, you know, you're kind of doing everything, is that you're not going to, maybe that's not the right way to go. You sort of get into the details too much. You know, we, I think, really enjoy the bootstrapping process, like diving in and getting our hands dirty. And so that kind of played into what we enjoy and our skill sets. And so I think that was part of the reason that, like, you know, again, a lot of success, you're putting one foot in front of the other, but at the end of the day, you know, do you get the traction you need, and what does the competitive landscape look like? I think we were pretty lucky with some of those things playing out the way they did.
Yeah. And from what I understand, toward the end, maybe when you sold, or maybe right when AOL closed, I understand, I think at Engage, you said that there had been 10 years of content, 36,000 posts, 3 million real wedding photos, 20,000 plus couples, 18 million page views per month. My God, you built something incredible, the two of you.
Yeah. And it evolved over time. You know, I think that in the days back then, it was nowhere near that. And so we sort of, like Tait said, we had to kind of dig deep and go out and find this content and find these vendors and play and experiment. And that's the beauty of the internet, is that you can play. You don't have to, there are no rules. We get to just do, you know, we get to experiment. And if something doesn't work, we can pivot and try something else. And we had this group of vendors, Jose, but then many, many more that were a part of our little black book that were willing to go on that journey with us, and that were open-minded and that were excited and ready for something new. So we got really lucky in terms of timing and in terms of this community and the people that sort of gravitated towards us.
Yeah.
When Abby started a vendor directory, I remember telling her that will never work.
Yeah.
And
Why?
so did everybody else.
So my dad did too. Yeah.
Why did you think Tait wouldn't work?
Well, you know, you had seen some of the other companies do it. And even in 2007, 8, it didn't feel like new and fresh and different, right? It felt like she was doing something very similar to what these other companies were out there doing. I think the thing that I missed immediately, and this is, you know, Tait Larson armchair quarterbacking before he really got into it, right? Was that it doesn't really matter if the idea is the same. The curation was different. The voice is different. The dedication to, you know, more of a luxury space, a better aesthetic, all of that stuff was really different. And the vendors were able to really see and make sort of like an apples to apples comparison. And a lot of them really liked what Style Me Pretty was doing. And so that was, you know, again, went right over my head, but Abby got it, Michelle got it, and the vendors got it.
Yep.
And then, okay, so all this time goes by, you've built, you know, an enormous company and something that people could really connect with, you know, and relate with. Because I believe that is the heart of it, right? There was heart in it too, you know? And so it comes up to the point, I'm going to skip ahead, where apparently you get an offer by Oath or AOL. But I mean, how did that go?
So it all happened because Tait's childhood friend had been working with AOL on various deals, and AOL was very interested in content, specifically female-driven content. A lot of their advertisers were aligning themselves with female-driven brands. And the woman who was heralding this whole process, her name is Maureen, she was awesome. She believed that Style Me Pretty Weddings was really just the beginning. That if you grabbed a girl during her most, you know, important moment thus far, her wedding, then you could carry her with you into buying a home and having a baby and celebrating all of those life's moments. So she saw Style Me Pretty as really the beginning of many more content streams that could be born out of it. And given that AOL was laser focused on content, it seemed like a good fit, a natural marriage. So AOL, through Tait's childhood friend, made us an offer. And because part of that offer included staying on for 4 years, we felt like, okay, we can do this because that gives us some time and space to keep working on the stuff that we're working on, that we believe in, that we care about, and that we want to see to fruition. So, and also it took an enormous financial burden off of our family. When you run your own business, as so many people in this industry do, that's a concern. The idea of having a successful exit so that you could take that stress off, given that this might be our only thing that we do, who knows? We didn't know what our future looked like. So taking that stress off allowed us to really just focus on the business and do what was right for the business instead of, what we needed to do from a financial perspective.
And you're also raising children, right? Your kids are pretty young now, like from 4 to 9 right now, or what they are. So back then, even more so.
Yeah. I mean, Theo wasn't even born yet. We had 2 little kids, and I'm a very hands-on mom. I have a very weird work-life balance and always have. And one of the things that this partnership between AOL and Style Me Pretty afforded me to do was to rely on a staff a little bit more, give benefits to our family and to everybody else. And there was a very practical component of this deal also.
Did you think beyond that 4-year period at all?
So Maureen is no longer with AOL. She's actually the COO over at Rent the Runway, and she's kicking butt. She's awesome. But she was really our biggest champion under the brand, and I loved working with her. So I think that as long as she was around, I was going to be around. Her making that change had nothing to do with what happened with Style Me Pretty, but I think that when we first signed that deal, she's an inspiration just as a business person, as a mother. I loved working with her. So as long as she was going to be there, I was. We had no experience selling a business. We had no experience working with a huge corporation like that.
Yeah.
So we didn't know. We had to sort of take a blind leap. And in many ways, it was a great leap. There were some struggles for sure, but I think that ultimately we thought we were doing the right thing for the business and for our family.
I think also we started in a place, in 2008, or we left off in a place in 2008 where it was me, Abby, and Michelle. We're now in 2012 and there's like 15 to 18 Style Me Pretty employees. There's real revenue. And we're starting to do really different things in the business, right? So Tait Larson's not a programmer. Abby's writing some content, but she's doing a lot more marketing. 2012.
Okay.
So there's a lot more management. There's a lot more overhead. There's really different roles, right? For people that sort of like to get their hands dirty. They're doing
we had been pulled away from what we love. So we were running a business.
So for me, I was excited. We had this cool content brand. I also, now we're in a different financial cycle as well, right? Capital is a lot easier to come by, and it's gotten even easier since then, right? So there was this chance of like, maybe there is like a second thing for us, and maybe we get to start over and do something else. Maybe now we can take all of these great skills that we've learned, and in 4 years, and of course you're going to learn more working for a big company, kind of go back and start over and do it again with successful exits under our belt. Now we'd have an opportunity to raise money if we wanted. So there was this alternative future that I think, at least for me, was like, okay, that could be something that we would want to do later.
So if I could take a moment, I want to say that Abby and Tait talk so much about having meaningful conversation to really express your brand message in a meaningful way. It's so important in today's world to be authentic. And one of the most important, impactful moments and elements of any wedding, of any event, is the band. And this band, Rhythm 6, talk about being authentic and meaningful. One of the reasons they're so popular and so loved is how they connect with their crowds, because it is not just a show. It is not just another performance. There is a team behind Rhythm 6 that gets to know every single client, wants to know what their personal story is, and basically express it through this incredibly impactful emotional element and tool of music. So if you want to learn more about Rhythm 6, go to theweddingbiz.com/Rhythm 6. Again, that's theweddingbiz.com/Rhythm 6. And now back to my conversation with Abby and Tait. When this 4-year period ended, you all basically had a year off, right?
We did.
Yeah.
Yep.
What was that like, Abby? First of all, because I'm just thinking too, the way you are, you have been working so hard and also, really being a present mother and all that. And all of a sudden, I understand financially it's wonderful, but still it's like, how did this affect you to just bam?
Well, I would have these moments of, oh God, I got to do something rather than pack lunches. So I coded up a little personal blog and then I, would put it on the table for a while and then I'd go shoot some random piece of content just to see if I still was interested in that. I did well in my year off. I needed that.
Yeah.
I needed that break. I needed to be with my kids. I love being a mom.
Yeah.
And I think that year did me enormous amounts of good just from a sanity and brain space kind of place. So that when this all happened again, I actually was ready. I was kind of toying with the idea of maybe starting something when the kids were back in school. We're about a year out from that. So timing wise, maybe a little premature, but really headed in the right direction. Well,
and before we get to that point, and what about you, Tait? So, because from what I understand, you were pursuing some other possible startups. Is that right?
I never sort of stopped.
Yeah.
I tend to not stop. I like to continue to work, even if it's Saturday or Sunday morning. Every moment I get, I'm kind of doing something. So, I left AOL and it was, okay, well, what do you want to do? Right. And there wasn't this immediate need to make money because we've been lucky enough to have this nice exit. So I was like, okay, well, if you kind of want to rewrite your story, the first thing we did a few investments with some various companies. Now that's really great. If you have a little bit of money, what you can then do is you can, put a little dollars behind other people. And now you suddenly have this reason to call them up and take them to lunch and hear their story. So we did some in the life sciences space. We did some in sort of the analytics space on the consumer web side. And so that was really fun for me. And the other thing is, I had been sort of more of an operator, managing, hiring, worrying about the P&L for Style Me Pretty. And I was like, yeah, but I want to get my hands dirty again. What has changed in computer science and, technology since I was more of a developer? And the truth is kind of everything changed. But for me, I was like, okay, let's be a mobile web developer. Let's take a class and go do it. You're not better than that, right? At the very least, you'll use those skills as an opportunity to manage people later. What's going on with artificial intelligence, right? It was
These are not things that I think about. I don't wonder what's going on with artificial intelligence.
So, I'm lucky to live in this.
I wonder what's going on with the housewife.
The Bachelor, what's going on in The Bachelor?
What's going on there?
So we're all lucky to live in these times where there's so much free content, especially around education online. So, okay, do you want to take a course, in artificial intelligence from MIT or biology from MIT? There's this great professor out in the University of San Francisco named Jeremy Howard, who has this Fast AI series. And the guy just really gets how to explain this stuff to people. And he's so cutting edge and you can sort of see this world changing, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I really wanted to get into some of that stuff. I also, I did some stuff sort of playing with the idea of moving more into life sciences. We're in sort of this great life sciences hub. So one of investments was in a life sciences company.
Yeah.
And are you awake?
I am. Actually, I am interested in life
totally
sciences.
Interested.
I'll get to the end of this pretty quick and you can cut it out if you want. But, essentially he was in the process of starting to launch other companies, this math professor. And so he invited me to come in and be an entrepreneur in residence at his lab at Northeastern. So I did that for a hot minute before Style Me Pretty came back and here we are again.
Well, all right. So
but I did learn a little bit. And one of the things I really learned was, when you're starting to look at some of these ideas again, and how do I start from the ground up? It's really hard to get the traction that's there. So I was excited when Style Me Pretty came back about all this brand traction that was just kind of available.
All right, before we go there, I got it. Because from what I understand, both of you were as surprised as the rest of us when the announcement came. What did you think?
A lot of people don't realize that now Oath is, do you guys know Oath?
Well, I know. Yeah, it's like you talked about the branding companies and that's kind of what they do. Yeah.
Oath was the name given because after the Verizon acquisition, so it was Verizon, AOL, and Yahoo that sort of needed to be threaded together in a cohesive way. So the name Oath was born. And I think, I don't know how it's used in the public, but internally it's, it was a positive message, bringing everybody together and getting them motivated. So Oath had been making pretty big changes over there. There were a couple brands that had closed down in the weeks prior. So we had sort of been watching, so I won't say that it was a huge, enormous surprise, but
she kept telling me,
go ahead.
I think they're going to close it.
And
I'm like,
you had a little hint.
They're not going to close it.
Why would they close it? Yeah, why would they close it? So yeah, we found out right alongside the rest of the world with, an Instagram post.
How did you feel?
Oh God, it was a kick in the gut and a panic. I mean, I panicked. I think that, and I mentioned this at Engage, if you heard my speech, that there was so much of my life that was just baked into this site. Even now, I'm planning my daughter's 10th birthday, and I went back, and every single one of her birthdays, including her first birthday, was on Style Me Pretty when she was a little baby. So, our whole life, our marriage, everything was sort of baked into this business. And while I had left it behind and I was fine and I was super happy, I took for granted the idea that I could go back and I could visit anytime I wanted to, sort of like a friendly neighbor, or a relative. And so it was an enormous shock. And
I think like a lot of the decisions we even made when we knew we might leave were brand first. We wanted to make sure that the brand was always really positioned to do well. And so when that suddenly wasn't going to happen anymore, that was a huge shock and something that was really hard to accept.
We also knew the people that worked for Style Me Pretty. And I knew that, a lot of those women, and there were men too, but a lot of those women had been with me since like year 2.
Yeah.
One of the girls, Michelle, had been with me from the very, very beginning. And I knew that the salaries that they brought home were an important part of their household. So that was crushing, and this is such a weird setup. We're all virtual employees. We always have been. Style Me Pretty employees are scattered all over the country. Yeah. So it's such a weird and unique setup that getting another job or getting a like-minded job without really disrupting their family, I knew that was going to be a pretty big deal. So, it was layered. The emotions were definitely layered. It was scary. I was so sad.
Well, and the way the industry responded, right? There were, from what I understand, there were people who were thinking, well, we got to band together and buy it. And people were freaking out. There were people who, unfortunately, had almost everything in the Style Me Pretty site. They were going to lose it. Some people didn't, they had all their presence.
Yeah, a lot of people had used Style Me Pretty as their portfolio, their visual portfolio, and had kind of trusted that their regular features, a lot of vendors are featured, numerous times. I know it's sort of hard to break that code, but once you do and you begin getting a lot of features, then it's easy to kind of construct this visual portfolio and just point to that rather than to continuously update your own site. So, and I think the messaging when Style Me Pretty was closing to go quickly bookmark and save and screenshot your content, that was panic inducing, and I think people that even if they didn't really need to do that were doing that just in case they were missing something. So yeah, the industry responded in such an enormous way that, and having kind of been asleep at the wheel for the last year, I had forgotten how incredibly passionate this group of people can be and vocal. And that was life-changing for me. It really was. I shed many a happy tear over this and I was moved beyond belief.
From the response
just
from the
industry. Response, yeah. And I got emails from people that I haven't heard from in many years. And I got emails from brides and grooms and moms and dads whose children had been featured. It was amazing. I never anticipated, of course, all I'm thinking about is myself and my employees when this happens. And then very quickly you see the vendor response and you think, oh God, and then the brides and then their families. And, it was this watered down effect where you realize for the very first time, probably in my whole career, that the work that I was doing actually affected people in some small way. It was an enormous realization for me that truly changed my life.
How? How did it change your life?
I don't take a single second of this process for granted. When I choose the words that I'm going to put up, when I select the pictures that I'm going to share, when I talk about it on social media, when I talk about it here to you, I realize the effect that it has on the people that are in this.
The way they're really consuming this.
Yeah. I think watching the small businesses that were concerned and affected and worried about their revenue dollars, every day we get up and we go to work and we push out, the stuff that we're supposed to do and we make it happen. But there's a myriad of other people and places and spaces and, relationships that are affected in some small way. What we're talking about here, and someone's listening in their car, they're going to go tell their sister or their aunt, and that aunt is going to share another story, and it's going to create this whole kind of circular movement. And I think that was the first time I ever saw that. In the 10 years that I've been doing that.
So I was going to ask, but I think I know the answer now, why, at least partly why you both decided to get back in.
Well, we didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, these days were so up and down. When we first reached out, AOL was fairly far down that rabbit hole. They had already started refunding vendors, refunding advertisers. So we really didn't even know if it was going to be possible. We had a lot of companies, big media brands, groups of vendors, like you said, reaching out, asking what they could do. And we honestly didn't know what the answer was. So we just kind of directed people to the right person. And I wrote a very passionate letter just asking to please listen to Tait and myself, and they did. And quite frankly, like Oath and AOL, it's good people. Like they actually really listened to us, and they understood our point of view, and they understood the depth and the shift in this industry that it might cause, and they were okay giving it back to us. I think that was a decision that came easily to them. So, it seemed very dramatic. On our end, it was pretty rational. There were days when we didn't think we could make it happen, but once we broke open that conversation, it was a good thing.
And it sounds like, there's a different kind of a mission that you both have now because you understand how it affected people.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I think that, Tait and I, our marriage is so intertwined in this business, probably to a fault.
Yeah, we're going to come to that too.
We talk about this to no end. And a lot of times we disagree and we push each other, and we usually net out on the same side. So I think that we are in this super crazy rare opportunity to start over with this business that already has such a loyal and engaged and big brand. And not many people get to do that with their business. We learned so much. We learned this business in such an intimate way, but now we get to start over. And that's pretty amazing.
Can you imagine if somebody was like, oh, you built something huge. We took away all the employees and we took away all the revenue, but you get the bones of it back. You get all the content, all the reach, all that stuff. What do you want to build now?
Yeah.
Right? That's a really
And I know that that's the zone that you're in.
Right.
When we met over at Engage, Tait, I remember you were saying, we don't know what we're doing. What are we going to talk about on your show? And I was like, this is perfect. Oh, no. I want to get in this. I want to know. Abby, you said earlier you didn't know if I was listening to the speech. I was listening to the speech, and I actually type really fast. I have like your entire speech right in front of me.
I could have just emailed it to you. I typed my whole thing out word for word.
Yeah, but I really absorbed it by writing it, stuff like that. But so one of the things that you said was, this is not necessarily a quote, but don't have the luxury to build the same company again, and don't have the desire. And now I'm understanding better what you meant by that, and can't put it in 2018 because, quote, so much has changed in the industry. What do you feel has changed in the industry?
Oh, God. Where to even begin? So yeah, Tait would love to speak on this, I'm sure, but rewind back to 2007, where we were one of maybe 5 blogs, wedding blogs. Pinterest didn't exist.
Right.
Instagram didn't exist. Facebook was there, but it was a baby. I think Twitter launched in 2007.
Yep.
So everything has changed. People.
How about the iPhone?
Yeah, mobile wasn't there. There was no phone. The whole world has changed, but let's distill it down.
A year ago,
I was going to say, let's distill it down to just a year.
Yeah.
So we now have to look at these social platforms as unique content streams, as individual entities. We have to pay them as much love and attention as we do our full-bodied content. We have to acknowledge that people read their content, at least 60% of people on our site read their content on their phone. So we have a very physically small window, and then we have about a minute to actually grab their attention. And
some people say 8 seconds these days.
Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah. But more than that, blogs are a dime a dozen. Pretty things are a dime a dozen. Perfect is no longer just something that those aspirational planners and designers do. Perfect is something that anyone can do and create and make. That's the standard. That's the bar. So our question is, do we jump on board with all of that? Do we create clicky content that's perfect, that, gets people clicking and gets people using it right out of the gate? Or do we just take a breath? And do we try to kind of reclaim our roots for being really well curated, really inspirational, really beautiful, really thoughtful, choosing our words carefully. Do we slow down a little bit and kind of try to see where the internet's going to go in the next couple of years so that we're not just putting a Band-Aid on the situation right now, but we're learning from it and we're slowly and organically building a site that's going to sustain changes?
Well, and I'm also thinking that at Engage, you also said that the barometers of success had changed. And so traffic might not be the priority anymore for you, which is interesting in this realm. And you were saying, how deep do we go? How engaged readers are? And you said how to stand out in a crowd that is so saturated.
What are the major dichotomies between when you're running a content site that's part of a larger organization that's really meant to grow audience versus operating in the wedding space, especially the luxury wedding space, is that it's really getting closer to the transaction or really driving people towards the transaction in the luxury space that matters. It's not the number of people we bring in, it's bringing in the right people.
Yes.
And so for us focusing on that, I think going forward as our mission statement, that's a big part of what we want to do. Will Style Me Pretty be a big brand? Will it have a good reach? Yeah, it will. And we'll continue to do a lot of those things on social, really pushing the brand and getting it out there and furthering it. We have very much a view of the world where it doesn't matter where you consume our content. We just want you to consume our content. The site will be different, I think. For us, you're not going to compete with Instagram and Pinterest with respect to just inspiration.
And these days, who knows? It could change. What's the next thing?
I absolutely think it will change, right? I think it'll change not only in organic reach, but also in paid reach and ability to target. Like all of these social media accounts.
You can't depend on this anymore, on one particular thing to last.
Well, yeah. I think Facebook is a great lesson, right? So Facebook, and every social media platform has gone through this. You get in early if you're lucky. There's a growth phase where they're really encouraging everyone to follow everyone else. And at that point, a lot of users are onboarding onto the platform and you grow your following quite a bit. After that, the platform gets saturated by organic content producers, right? At that point, your audience is going to flatten out a little bit. And then at some point, Facebook flips the switch because they say, whoa, there are so many people here producing content. That's not what our readers want. And then your organic reach goes to nothing. You can still use it as a paid social platform. But, you would be foolish to think that Instagram's not going to do the same thing, or Pinterest at some point might do some of the same stuff. So I think, you have to be ready for a lot of those changes. And we've started to look at that and try to make sure we're well positioned. And I also think with respect to on-site, you're going to be able to do a lot through Pinterest and Instagram and sort of seeing some of the inspiration. But there's a lot you can't do, right? You can't compare vendors. You can't understand why one vendor might be better than another.
Yeah.
A beautiful bouquet from a florist, that just means she can create one beautiful bouquet. It doesn't mean she can do an outdoor wedding with 300 guests. And so we can tell those stories on site and we can sort of be that reference while still being beautiful and curated and still having great content that people want to browse at the same time.
Traffic is really meaningless unless it's qualified. And so there have been moments in Style Me Pretty's lifespan where we were just needing page views and trying to game the system and trying to get as many eyeballs onto the page as possible. But that doesn't actually make a difference. That doesn't make more people book a certain vendor or more people buy a certain dress. That traffic really has nothing to do with it. It's getting the right kind of people who want that Style Me Pretty wedding and are willing to go through that channel to make it happen. So if we can make it easier for them, then it will trickle down to the vendors in a far more meaningful way that actually gets them.
But isn't that one of the biggest challenges that we all have, is how to market, promote in a way that does get the right clients for us?
Yes. And I think that's part of what's exciting about us getting the business back, right? If we can lean into that and if we can make the challenges that you guys have our challenges as well, as we solve those problems, we'll be able to provide processes and tools that help vendors solve them as well.
Yes.
And this is what you're working on now.
Yeah, it's pretty basic what we're doing at Style Me Pretty. I mean, we spent a long time just trying to get the site up and running and stable. And now we're looking at how I write a wedding, how I choose a wedding, then how do I take the wedding and turn it into an edited piece of content? And then from there, how do I push it around social media? How do I make sure that I have the right vendors? How do I message it in such a way that makes people want to click on those vendors? And Tait is sort of studying that process alongside of me to see what can be simplified, what can be automated, how we can, build tools that make our work smarter and not harder, now that, there are so many different avenues you have to kind of tap into. And hopefully as we have these learnings, then we'll be able to provide more for the vendors that are a part of this community.
And you mentioned at Engage that you were talking to vendors, to hear, what do they think? Like, what have you learned so far from them?
Tait's been doing most of the talking.
Yeah, so I try to talk to a few vendors every week. There's this nostalgic sort of view with a lot of vendors.
Oh, so it's hard to think differently.
Yeah, can we just go back to 2011?
Yeah, right.
That's mostly what I hear. Please,
interesting.
Can we go back? We want you to be this hyper-curated voice. And the truth is that the world has changed. Yeah. And we have to change along with it. And we have to sort of provide something that probably is a little different. I think that's one of the really biggest challenges that I have is sort of like, how do we reposition Style Me Pretty, come up with a new set of offerings, explain them, and then really get everyone on board with them. Now, I think it's easier to understand what everyone's problems are. So we're going to have to really start there and kind of like communicate and sort of make sure that we're saying, hey, look, this is your pain point. We think we're going to solve it. And, just to jump ahead a little bit, I think the big problem that I always hear about is essentially market saturation. That's the one thing when I'm getting vendors on the phone that that's one of my questions. What's your biggest problem today?
It's from top to bottom, from vendor directories to content that's up on site to social media and how easy it is to be overlooked now, to the algorithms. And I mean, it's definitely the saturation is out of control. And so these vendors that have been in this business for a very long time, whose businesses are honed and well-oiled machines, they're having a hard time doing their job every day, and figuring out how to stand out and claim that spot as the professional.
I think it's this really interesting world, right? So, okay, if we want to rewind and put Style Me Pretty into this history, magazines, a few weddings get featured every year, maybe like 200 can fit into these magazines. Style Me Pretty comes along. We featured 30,000 weddings at some point. Yeah. Pinterest comes along. Instagram comes along. The world is now suddenly flooded with beautiful high-end wedding content. What does that do? It pulls more professionals into the industry who create even more content. Yeah. So we've all sort of done this to ourselves. We've sort of gone out and by marketing the beauty that's created, we've brought a lot of people in that say, yeah, me too. Like, I want to be a creative professional and I want to play in that space as well. So I think vendors are starting to really feel that. Not that they didn't before, but it's certainly one of the things that I hear a lot about when I talk to them.
Well, and doesn't this lead to going deeper and making things more meaningful? And
yes,
that's the only alternative. I mean, if it's got to be it's either got to be amazing in quality, or it's got to be really, really meaningful. And that at this point, those are the only two pillars that sort of allow you to stand out from the crowd.
When vendors come up with a different way to say market saturation, I hear about justifying my prices. And I like to sort of look at it through that lens a little bit. How can Style Me Pretty, or how can you sort of justify your prices? It's really hard to do through a social platform, because if you put up a photo of a pretty bouquet, there's 1,000 other florists who've put up a photo of a really pretty bouquet. So, you have to go a little deeper and you have to tell that bigger story, and you have to explain that wedding that was outside in that barn in that remote location, that was really hard for those vendors to pull off, right? And not everybody can do that. And so I think that's part of our mission going forward, really helping vendors tell the story of just how hard it is to execute this stuff.
Or just, what level of experience is necessary to pull something off like that. And it affects every single industry. And now that photographers and florists and planners are doing workshops and they're teaching their peers how to do what they do, it's becoming even more and more important. We'll get 5 photographers sending in very similar pictures of the same workshop.
Oh yeah.
And it's incredibly hard. And I look at photos every day of my life, but even as somebody who's been staring at beautiful photography for a long time, it's hard to discern between who's leading the workshop and who the students are.
Yeah, there's something related to this too with what you're talking about, and you had said, I love this. I took it down verbatim. We are a group of the most creative people and yet rely on everyone else to decide how valuable we are when actually we're kicking ass, and basically that's how we should be valuing our success.
Yeah, we're I look at the industry, quote unquote, as this group of people that has sort of ridden the tide right alongside me. And I've learned from all of them. And I hope that they've learned from Tait and myself a little bit. But we've gotten into this really weird, bad habit of just waiting for other people to praise us or tell us that we're doing good, or, putting it out there for judgment, when the way that we gauge our success has nothing to do with any of that. It's, are we... Like for Tait and myself, it's very different. But for wedding professionals, are you doing the kind of work you want to do every day? Are you afforded that luxury? Do the weddings that you're bringing in bring enough money so that you can start curating down the people that you work with, the places that you work with, the kind of voice that you're allowed to have in the experience? There are way better pillars of success and gauges of success than what we're actually relying upon now. And we get a lot of pushback through support and email from people that are very unhappy that we didn't tag the right Instagram person, or we didn't, we didn't phrase it just right. She was an event stylist, not a planner. And we want to do right by our vendors. We really, really do. We'll cross miles to make sure that they get what they want out of a feature from us. But that's not what's valuable to you. What I say about you really doesn't make a huge impact. What makes a huge impact is how well are you thriving every single day? Are you having fun? Is it fun anymore? Because I've heard a whole lot of people who aren't having fun anymore. Yeah. A lot. And that ultimately is what success is. It's just a weird world now. It's so public. And this space for judgment is so severe.
And there's also, right now, at this time that this is being recorded, there's a backdrop of a lot of fear, the political situation, all of this.
Sure. Yeah. Our personal lives are a little unsteady, and I think that when you lump all that together, it's just a bit of a shaky environment right now. And things are changing so quickly politically and online and with the way that we work and the way that we do business. And it's hard to have confidence in that process.
What I love the most about what you both are talking about, and you just said, Abby, is people needing to really bring that fun back, and feel like they're thriving, and that how they value their own success.
We're like little wedding factories, we just get up every day and we work. And we know that we've got to put this on Instagram and that on Instagram. And then we've got to go do this wedding and that, like our brains are spinning, but if we could just capture some of that magic that we had 10 years ago, where it was fun and all of this was new and we were learning and we were kind of trying to decide who we were as an online presence, as a professional, as a whatever, maybe it would trickle down in a far more positive way than we even think, If there's no way to get noticed anymore online, and if you're just relying upon the judgment of other people, what if you just focused on having a blast, doing what you love, and pushing yourself creatively, and then the rest just kind of followed suit?
And it sounds like this is a mission for the two of you, is how to help facilitate that through Style Me Pretty.
The real wedding has been distilled down to just these pictures, these perfect little pictures. And we have lots of them. We have over 3 million images. That doesn't really help because it's these little nuggets. But what if we pulled it all together and really, like Tait said, tried to help tell the story from the lens of that incredible wedding planner and what she has to do every day and why she brings such value to your wedding in a far bigger and deeper way.
One of the other themes I've heard a lot about from vendors that I think Instagram sort of pulls you away from this is authenticity. Everything looks so staged and so perfect that both the wedding vendors and then even the brides or grooms that consume this content, they often wonder, is my wedding really going to look like that? Does it really look like that? Doesn't feel right. So there is this opportunity, again, it's to tell the story of the behind the scenes. I hear this a lot too. I did this great behind the scenes Instagram story and people loved it. You hear a lot of the engagement happening on sort of the flip side, right?
Yes.
The opposite. And so sometimes looking for those spaces and for us, I think, to play there, I think that's one of the things we really want to do.
I don't know what Style Me Pretty is going to look like in a year. I really don't. I think that this entry level period, we're still very much learning. and we're making predictions and we're making educated guesses.
We're making a lot of little bets.
Little bets. But I do think that Tait and I, more than anybody, and thanks in large part to like this experience and the way that we connected with vendors after and during all of this, we understand better than ever where the flaws are in the way that vendors are represented online and how we can better fill those voids. I don't think it's right to just be another vendor directory or to just be a blog. I think that we have to kind of start weaving all the pieces together in a more organic way. I think we need to start educating the people that, you know, the vendors that are willing to go on this ride with us as to what is valuable. And then we need to learn from them how they're judging us and how we can service them better than already has been.
And also just where's the pain, right? If we can lean into the pain, I think that's one of the realizations that I came to. I want to create and make their problems kind of our problems, because when we do that and we solve those problems, suddenly we've got something that we can take to the whole community and say, hey, this is working right now. You know, use this, do this, follow this process, use this tool, whatever it is.
And a lot of our discussions around, especially at industry events and things like that, it's really geared towards the vendor, but we're also simultaneously thinking about the couple that's getting married and how they're consuming content and what their pain points are, and trying to balance those with the needs of the vendor, which sometimes are very different. You know, so we're sort of trying to think about this in a full life cycle approach and making sure that we're creating a site that is useful and, you know, a reference point for brides, but that we're also really keeping the vendor as the heart.
Abby and Tait, I mean, I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I mean, you all are just being so vulnerable and out there, and you know, the mission that you have with Style Me Pretty is so needed.
Oh, I hope so. We're excited. I feel
We've enjoyed it too.
Yeah, it's been fun. And we took a year off of working together.
It was a sabbatical.
It was a sabbatical.
That's a good way to look at it.
And now and this is where our comfort zone is. We like working together. We like solving these problems, and you know, we like surrounding ourselves with this particular group of people. So we're having a lot of fun.
Last question. How are you all married, parents, running a business together? How are you doing this?
We don't know any other way. We started this when we were so young. We don't know any other way. Yeah,
I mean, I've been working off and on from home for 11 years now. You as well, right? Maybe longer for you. And then, you know, my parents were also married business owners. People look at it and I think they think that their spouse might drive them crazy, but maybe if they had just enough, you know, just different enough roles, right?
Yeah. So we know our lane.
Right.
Oh, okay.
We know our lane. Tait doesn't presume to get in my creative way, and I would never, ever challenge his technical savvy. So we trust each other and we have complete ownership over our side of the fence, you know, so it comes together fairly easily.
And I think if you like being told when you're wrong, which I think, you know,
which he has to feel that.
No, well, the flip side of that is when you're wrong and you go with it, right? Okay. When you're wrong and you go with it, it's like, you know, there are times where I've built stuff for Style Me Pretty or went down the wrong path where I'm like, I should have been on a beach. I should have been hanging out for months at a time, but I did this thing. It just, you know, it cost us a lot of time, effort, energy, money, right? You want someone to tell you when you're wrong. As an entrepreneur, I think you get to that point. And when you realize that, just having that sounding board you trust, you know, with you at all times, that's a huge benefit.
Yeah. We're our own kind of best judges of character and design. I think that if we want to know the truth, we go to the other person, and good, bad, or ugly, we tell it to each other.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. I can't wait to see what's coming.
Oh, me neither.
Me neither.
Right.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Andy. This was great.
Well, thank you, everybody, to listening to my conversation with Abbey and Tait Larson, founders of Style Me Pretty. Wasn't that something else? Woo! That was, I loved it. Be sure to check out the show notes and our website at theweddingbiz.com. And please be sure to share, as we spoke about earlier, if you could each just choose even one person to share either this episode, hopefully, or any other episode that was meaningful to you with one person in the community, that would be wonderful to help everyone out get this education and inspiration. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please review it. It helps new people find the show. And last thing I want to mention, I'm going to tell you in a moment who we're going to release next week. Before I say that, I am going to New York City next week to interview Brian Raffanelli for a second time. I am so excited to see Brian. The first interview, which was released part 1 recently, was just off the chain. I can't wait to sit down with him for a second time. And we're going to give you a chance to send in a question. And we're going to pick one person. We're going to ask Brian your question. We're going to mention your name and your company. You're going to get a really good plug. So be sure to go to either theweddingbiz.com or follow us on Instagram at weddingbizshow. You'll see where you can click to ask Brian a question, and hopefully we'll choose your name and company. So I want to mention next week's guest, and that is a part 2 with Preston Bailey. That's right. Preston Bailey. We re-released his maybe a couple months ago. I had interviewed him a long time ago. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And this one, sitting down with Preston, oh, wow. We went deep. I mean, Preston is so open, so vulnerable. It's an incredible conversation. So be sure to tune in next week. So again, until that time, have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thanks for listening to The Wedding Biz.